Minimalism's dangerous, you piece of shit. You're fucking nothing but a homeless, jobless, fucking worthless piece of shit. You're not gonna survive if the world comes to a fucking apocalypse. What the fuck is wrong with you? Quit telling people that minimalism is so fucking great. You're hurting society and everyone around you with your message. So, you know, every once in a while, and I'm going to pick on one particular YouTuber here, but I've heard this argument from maximalists, consumerists, capitalists, a whole bunch of ists and shit against minimalism. And there's a reason that minimalism has become a lot more mainstream. And, I tend to dip my toe in some tinfoil hat shit from time to time. But I want to respond to a video that was put out by Daphne Reloaded, a former vegan who I originally started watching because she left veganism and had some really solid points on nutrition. But it seems to have become averse because I guess she did a homestead at some point. She's been coming down hard on minimalism. And I wanted to address some of the points that she made because they have been made by others since I started talking about minimalism. And, it's from her. We're going to do a reaction here to her video, Is Minimalism Dangerous? Why there is a huge push for us all to be homeless. And I just want to answer and address her comments that she makes in this video. Now, make no mistake, homelessness is growing in this country due to the gap between the rich and the poor and corporate power pretty much pushing out the middle class, and they're not pushing them up, they're pushing them down to the point where they can't afford to live. Even though they're making a decent wage, they can't afford a place to live in a lot of our cities now. And it leads to this downward spiral to where they actually hit bottom. And they end up out on the streets or living in their vehicles involuntarily. I myself come from a background of living in a vehicle quite often. For 7 years, I did the homeless trucker thing where I kept all my shit in storage, and I was miserable the whole time with it because I wanted that American dream of having my own house, my own car, all of this stuff that I didn't have for a very long time while I lived on the road. And when I started to achieve some of those milestones, I found that it didn't make me any happier. It didn't make me more fulfilled, and that it forced me to have to work a lot more just to maintain that lifestyle. Now it's getting harder to maintain that lifestyle for hundreds of thousands. There's like 108,000, I think, homeless people in California right now, right at this very moment. That's a lot of people living. That's a whole city's worth of people living out on the street. And it's because of this push, this divide between upper class and lower class, with barely anybody in the middle. If you're in the middle of that, with our debt-driven fucking bullshit, corporate-ruled fucking capitalist system, you're in that middle zone, you're feeling it right now. You're living paycheck to paycheck. You don't have any savings. Your retirement's shit. You have no hope for a pension from your job in most cases. In some cases, you can't even get normal full-time work because they don't want to pay extra benefits. They don't want to pay you for your hard work in most of these companies because that takes out of the profits for the people on the upper end of the scale or the board, the stockholders. Their profit margins are thinned whenever they have to pay people more money. But without turning this to a major political thing, I do want to address some of the concerns brought up by Daphne in her fucking video. I doubt she's going to watch this, but if she does, it'd be nice to have a little counterpoint. I'm not attacking you, I'm just responding because you make some pretty bold claims about minimalism, some of which I agree with, by the way. I do think it is being commercialized and painted in a certain light, so we can agree on some things, but some things I think I disagree with, and I have some counterpoints to. So let's just fucking jump into it.
You were born to make a change. You were told that you were born to make a change. Maybe you were even told that you're a rainbow child, indigo child, or a crystal child.
No one ever told me any of that shit. No, I adopted minimalism purely because I was unhappy doing it the other way. And it made sense to me in terms of how much time, energy, and life force I spent consuming. And how I didn't have anything really to show for all of those years of consumption. That is how I view it.
You were told that there is no higher moral value than saving the environment, and you decided that you agreed. If you happen to fall into any of these categories, don't be surprised if you find yourself with a perfectionist mindset as well. The vegan, perfectionist, Vulcan mindset sent here to destroy you.
Now, there are a lot of vegan minimalists, and they probably still have that same vegan mindset, so I agree with you there. You can take minimalism too far. I always tell people it's not necessarily in a room with a laptop and a chair while you sleep on the floor. That's not what I'm talking about when I talk about minimalism. I'm talking about the opposite of consumerism, about only consuming things that are going to bring value to your life. I'm talking about not wasting resources and time. That's the biggest concern for me as a minimalist. I want to reclaim my time. I don't want to give it away anymore. And minimalism is a great path to pull you out of that corporate grind because you don't need to make as much money to survive. Cost of living withstanding, but you have options there as well. You don't necessarily have to live in a big, high cost of living area. You can go choose to live somewhere that is much cheaper and in turn make less money. Now, with technology, you can even make money no matter where you are on the planet, depending on your skill set, which you can develop and learn on your own outside the bounds of the university indoctrination that's out there and our education system. You can become quite thrifty and quite educated on your own if you give it the time necessary, which is time you often don't have because you're too busy buying new shit and going to jobs you fucking hate all the time. Doesn't leave a lot of time for research, reading books, listening to lectures, hearing anecdotal information on things. These are all things that you can't really get done because you're so busy working that shit job that you hate to buy the shit you don't need. Not to quote Fight Club for the millionth time, but,
The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and if you haven't thought about what that saying means in a while, this video provides you with the perfect moment to reflect. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and now I know why. Good people with good intentions have had their energy redirected from making any meaningful impact over to promoting Netflix documentaries and animal rights. Good people with good intentions are no longer allowed to have free money or time they need to make an original meaningful impact. No, they are forced to abide by the opinions that they have been given from TV, the media, and .gov. Forks over knives isn't real. The inconvenient truth isn't real. You vegans and your happy links to Netflix documentaries, you are such fools. These documentaries are not real. It's information bent for the effect, just like the GoPro lens bends the side of a swimming pool in a video. It isn't real. For the last 8 years, we have been swamped with Netflix documentaries surrounding animal rights, nutrition, and environmentalism. But who shows up next?
So, you don't... First of all, I don't subscribe to Netflix anymore. I've officially dropped my subscription to Netflix because I don't need to be told how to live my life by dickheads in Hollywood or any of the other places where they're creating these things telling me how to be virtuous and healthy that are just blatantly not true in most cases. So I've dropped Netflix and probably won't go back. I have not missed it. In fact, before I dropped it, I hadn't watched it in over a month, despite new shows coming out. So I don't find value in my values there. I think you're categorizing the majority of minimalists into one category, and that if you're a minimalist, you're automatically going to get sucked into all the bullshit that can come out with minimalism. A great deal of people are fairly reasonable minimalists that acknowledge that, yes, there is a certain level of consumption that's appropriate for them. And it's a little different for everyone. What level of consumption you allow yourself to get to. I mean, you can get down to a backpack full of like 50 items and live your life that way, or you can live in a house and apply minimalist principles to enhance your life, to not waste your most precious resource, which is time. Well, that is the kind of minimalism I'm talking about. I'm not talking about $150,000 fucking tiny house, or even going down to living in your car. The only reason I even bring up living in my vehicle is because I've done it. I did it for a living. I wasn't a minimalist and I did it. I know exactly what it's like to be a consumer living in a vehicle, so I know all of the traps and pitfalls versus a minimalist living in a vehicle. A consumerist living in a vehicle, you are wasting just as much time and resources as everybody else, just you're doing it in a vehicle. A minimalist in a vehicle, you have really shaved off a lot of items that you can't carry with you. You've become more about experiencing life because you don't actually stay in your fucking vehicle. And it allows you mobility and the ability to learn to survive without all of the creature comforts that many people take for granted. And it's the same thing you can get just by being a backpacker or going out into the woods. These are all exercises in figuring out what the bare essentials for your contentment are, and what you miss the most. You know, when you take yourself out of the house environment or the comfort of wherever you stay and you go out and you live rough for a little while, you're going to know the things that you miss and the things that you don't, that, you don't even think about, that you don't even give a shit about. And then when you get home, if you remember all of that, you can figure out what is important to you and get rid of the shit that isn't, and thus get rid of the amount of space you need and the amount of stuff. So, that's my thoughts there. We're not all fucking crazy van life, hipsters that are going to the lattes every day. That's not us. Well, I drink lots of coffee. It's a curse.
Debuted right after that. Oh, that's right. Marie Kondo. With her magical skills of tidying up,
Ironically, I'm aware of Marie, but wasn't the type of minimalism I followed.
Making your life as sterile as possible with Netflix, government consent, and popular opinion back.
And Daphne tends to focus on the extreme, cases of minimalists and vegans and everybody else who is not necessarily representative of the minimalist community as a whole. This is one person's version of minimalism. Minimalism is more of a concept than something you can categorize and lump everyone into. And that's the mindset that vegans fall into. It's either you are in either you're a vegan or you're not a vegan. There's no like, okay, I occasionally eat meat, or I occasionally, wear something that came from an animal. The moment you do that, it's black and white. You're no longer vegan, and you were never vegan. And it's the same thing in the minimalist community. There are people that view minimalism that if you buy one extra fucking thing that's frivolous to them, even though it might bring you a lot of value, and you've carefully weighed that purchase against the opportunity costs, against the amount of time you're going to have to spend to earn money to purchase that item, even though you've done all of this as a proper minimalist, because you bought something or did something that another minimalist views as something they would never do, that makes you not a minimalist. And that's a stupid mindset. You can't judge everyone based on your own values, because we all have different fucking values. You can't lump us all into one category and officially, you can't just say that all minimalists are this way, that it's something that is dangerous to society because you point out one of the extreme minimalists. There's many forms of minimalism, and the reasonable minimalist community has said so. If you watch any of like Matt Diavella, or whatever the two fucking guys that actually wrote the Minimalist book, which is a documentary on Netflix too, in addition to a bunch of other places, they tend to, be more about figuring out the concept and applying it to your individual life and the things that you value, while questioning your own values in the process. And it requires a lot of self-evaluation and self-reflection. Minimalism isn't about pleasing your neighbor or making someone's opinion of you, better. It's about not wasting your time on things you don't give a shit about. Not wasting your life energy earning from all of these corporations to ultimately buy shit you don't need that just sits on a shelf that doesn't do anything for you, ultimately going to waste eventually. The things just either pile up or they get thrown out, and they brought no value to your life. Weighing the opportunity cost. If I buy this, what am I giving up the opportunity to do that I could do with that money? That even came up. We were giving shit to Eric's on the Washington D.C. trip, where he went and spent $45. He says he doesn't regret it, but I saw signs of remorse for that, and I just wanted to kind of teach him that was, because it was a learnable moment for a kid. I'm like, okay, you spent your $45 of your spending money on buying these things, and yet we're in this area where you could have memorable experiences that will last you far longer than any of the items you bought here today. Those items will eventually end up in the trash or in a box somewhere or on a shelf somewhere, whereas the memories of things that you do will stick with you a lot longer, not take up any space, and bring you more contentment and happiness than the items you just purchased. And I kind of, I was doing it in a ball-busty way, but this is something that anybody could take a lesson from. Opportunity cost is one of the tenets of minimalism. When you spend money on something, that's something else that you can't do with that money. And it can be any number of things, right down to very survival. So there's that.
Her up. Minimalism is sweeping the nation just as quickly as trending veganism and environmentalism. And it's time you knew the truth. How they are all
Teach us the truth, Daphne.
connected. It is time that you were told the cold, hard truth. It's hard to find a minimalist video that doesn't come from a channel that's plant-based.
I'm fucking ketovore, so I don't know what the hell you're talking about there. I do see a lot of plant-based minimalists, and it's ironic because their form of minimalism isn't something that I'm necessarily interested in. A lot of van lifers are vegan. I'm noticing quite a bit, but those are the kind of the trendy virtue signaling versions of minimalism that I'm kind of not into. You know, how they're somehow virtuous because of how they live their life and the foods they eat. And that anyone who's not doing that is wrong in some way. But I still find that it's kind of the minority of the minimalist community that is that radical in their minimalism. A lot of people are just reasonable motherfuckers who wanted to get out of the rat race and found a way to do it that met their needs as far as happiness and fulfillment. And it's something to take into account. Now, I do see a lot of, YouTubers that are just telling you the good side of minimalism. There are some downsides. It's like anything else. There are mistakes that you will make on a regular basis, and it's a constant, lifelong lifestyle that you have to always be thinking about, what is of value to you. You have to evaluate yourself, and a lot of people can't do that. A lot of people just jump on the bandwagon. They see, okay, the rule book is I got to get rid of all this shit, and I got to live in a tiny house, or I got to live in a fucking car, and then I'm a minimalist. It's not, it's not something that's formulaic like that. You come up with concepts that fit your life, and my version of minimalism will be different than anybody else's version of minimalism, but we're all applying the same concepts. We just have different value systems. So it's, you might value having a big house, for example. And so you are willing to take the time and necessary after self-reflection and evaluation that you can afford to give 30 years of your time and life energy so that you have that house. Maybe you're doing it because you think it's an investment, or maybe you just like having a lot of space to live in, or, it's kind of that our human nature to gather and hoard resources, and you're just feeding that need. But for me, I don't have home ownership on my list of shit to do, because I know I don't need to. I know I can survive just fine without owning a home. And I know how to find ways to rent and live cheaply. With obviously the thing that I'm also able to do is to live in a vehicle for long periods of time. I've done it. I know I can do it again. And I know I could save a lot of money and time and have opportunities that I otherwise would not be able to have because I'd be paying shit tons of rent. And I'm willing to do that. I travel now, and I'm able to stay in my vehicle the entire trip and not have to pay any lodging costs. So I'm able to take any money I would have put on lodging costs and put it towards an experience or something, admission to a place that is charging money for me to join in or to go see things. I try to keep that to a minimum because I do get just as much fulfillment out of free shit. But, these are all concepts that are based on my values, which I'm always working on. I'm always trying to figure out what's valuable to me and what isn't. And sometimes I get it wrong. Sometimes I think something's valuable to me, and I go out and I buy it, or I or participate in that particular activity, and then I realize, this isn't really working for me. It didn't give me what I thought I would get out of it. I get a slight dopamine hit, which I'm hyper aware of. What's the difference between dopamine-driven behavior and serotonin-driven behavior? And, now that I've been able to distinguish that, I'm able to determine if I really am happy with something or not. A lot of people don't even have that ability. They think they're happy every time they get a dopamine spike, and that's just not the case. Dopamine is there to motivate us to do things, where serotonin is more of the contentment, brain chemical.
It is time you heard the dark side of minimalism. The notion that you can just exercise the KonMari method, throw most of your unwanted belongings away, digitize your life, buy a tiny house, and live mortgage-free is a fairy tale.
Yes and no. I currently live mortgage-free. I'll probably live mortgage-free forever, not to mention the fact that I think my credit's bad enough that they would not give me a mortgage even if I wanted one. I live under my means despite having a small income at the moment. This is achievable. But you can't fall into traps of consumerism that are disguised as minimalism. I mean, these are elaborate tiny houses meant to cram all of the creature comforts that you would enjoy in a regular size house into a smaller space. And I think it's kind of getting the concept of minimalism wrong. While I myself would enjoy a tiny house, it would still be a very basic tiny house. I wouldn't need all of this extra fucking shit crammed into it that inflates the price of it. Put a box on a trailer and give it some fucking air conditioning and some hookups, and I'm probably good to go for most things I do. Not to mention, I wouldn't spend all my time inside the house. When you live in a vehicle or you live in a tiny house, the majority of your time is going to be spent outside of the house. It's going to be, the house is the place for you to rest, maybe get a few things done, to maybe eat some food, and take a shit, wash your ass, wash your balls, and then you go back out into the world and experience life to the fullest. That is what a tiny living space accomplishes the most. You've chosen to prioritize experiences over what goes into your home. But I do see a lot of tiny houses that are they're just consumerist fucking versions of the, big house. And in some cases cost just as much, if not more than, an actual sized house. It's not to mention that you can finance these, and that is completely a waste of time and resources. If you're a minimalist and you financed a tiny house, you probably fucked it up in some way. You're bleeding off time that you otherwise didn't have to if you would have just waited and saved up and purchased it for cash. And you probably would be a lot more vigilant on what you bought as a tiny house, based on how much time it was going to have to take you to save up the money to buy that fancy tiny house that has the mechanical bed that lifts up, or the really expensive $3,000 TV that takes up one of the walls. And it's the more you cram into these little motherfucking houses, the more of your life energy you're going putting into that tiny house. For me, living in a small room, I am able to do everything I need, so I could theoretically do the same thing in a tiny house. And I wouldn't go and buy the biggest, baddest ass fucking tiny house I could find. There's a few things I would want. I would want air conditioning. I would want some, solar capability as well. And I need internet to do my job. So those were three things I need, which means I'd have to be close to the grid. Homesteading isn't an option when your sole source of income is, pretty much based on the internet, which between YouTube and Uber and all of those other things, I pretty much can't go out to the middle of nowhere and just have a tiny house and still survive necessarily. So it's a fundamental misunderstanding that goes in. So I do kind of agree with what she's saying, but once again, I feel like she's lumping everyone into this category of minimalism.
One that doesn't have a very good ending, mind you. The minimalism philosophy only seems good in theory, and only feels good in the short term. And honestly, once dissected, it isn't even a good theory. The theory is that if you don't keep a bunch of stuff on hand, that you won't need to go out and buy a bunch of stuff. But this theory falls short of any logic, and when put into use, it proves to be more expensive than any other lifestyle. According to the minimalists and KonMari herself, and also according to how most Japanese people live their lives, we should have no need to be stocked up on anything. We should keep on hand only that which we need for the current day and maybe half of the following day. Their lifestyle and philosophy dictate that they leave their apartment every day to every other day to go shopping.
This isn't true either. I go shopping once a week. And, I buy just the things I need. I don't go shopping to buy anything frivolous or anything like that. I don't eat out much. These are all things I've done because I want to save money. And keeping a hoard of shit on hand, now this is the prepping side, and I can see a little bit of the prepper coming out in Daphne. An argument could be made that you should keep some supplies on hand. But hoarding 6 to 8 months of food and water, I think, is unnecessary, because when it comes down to it in a survival situation, if you don't have the skills to go and acquire those things, then you will not survive long term if the shit hits the fan. So it's more important to learn to live without a lot of hoard of items, because there's two things that can happen if you have this big cache of food and water and the shit hits the fan. One, all the people that didn't do that are going to come and take your shit from you by force in a lot of cases, which necessitates defending yourself in that case. Or you'll live off of that shit until you run out, and then you'll be in the same boat a few weeks later when you get out into the world. Or you hoarded all of that shit, and the natural disaster that caused all of the problems destroyed your little survival hoard. All of these scenarios involve you being fucked. Has nothing to do with that you didn't keep enough shit on hand. I think it's more important to acquire the skills necessary to acquire those things. Learn how to filter and boil water. Learn what water sources are safe to drink from. Learn how to get and acquire food, whether it's learning what plants are edible or going out hunting and fishing to try and find food. If you get pushed back to hunter-gatherer times and you don't have the skills to do those things, you aren't going to survive, no matter how much you could hoard years worth of food, and so much can go wrong with that you pretty much wasted your time, resources, and energy hoarding that shit to begin with. Whereas learning to live a little more day to day and go out and survive. And make no mistake, when you're living in a vehicle, everything is effort, requires effort. If you got to take a shit, it requires effort. You got to eat something, it requires effort. You save money by not having to store the food, both in electricity costs of refrigeration and so on and so forth. If you just let the already running supermarket take care of it for you, and assuming that we don't end up in one of those survival situations, in which case that supermarket would be devoid of food almost. You can even watch it going on right now with a hurricane that's bearing down on Florida. Grocery stores will get raided with even the hint that some fucking natural disaster or man-made event is going to cause the shit to hit the fan. So, even if you did manage to get in there and hoard all your shit, it's really not going to solve your issue, particularly if the place you're storing your shit gets destroyed anyway. Not to mention you become a target for other people who got to the store a little too late and then didn't get their stash built up in their huge house that you're, advocating for. In a lot of cases, when these things go wrong, most of these houses that you're kind of advocating for, filled with all kinds of shit, are going to be utterly destroyed anyway, and maybe you'll be able to salvage a little bit of your food and water stockpile, but ultimately, if you don't have the skills to go out and survive without having a hoard of supplies, you are likely either going to succumb or be ushered off into the FEMA camp that you say. I don't believe it's quite that hardcore. I think, you still have your freedom to get out there and survive during these situations, and we've seen it through every disaster that's been out there, and we've also seen a great deal of people helping each other out. I think it's very pessimistic to think that our first instinct is going to be chaos during one of these natural disasters or man-made events. if the longer they go, I think it does devolve into a more survival of the fittest situation. But for the most part, I believe that initially people help each other out in a lot of these situations, contrary to the presentation that the media often presents. There are acts of heroism and kindness and courage, and people help out other people in these situations. You're not necessarily going to be alone on an island. You might have a neighbor that whose house didn't get blowed up with all of their 6 months of supplies in it, who will be like, hey, well, you can here have some. I have a little bit of extra. Let's try and get through this together. At the same time, you'll have the individuals who will come and steal your shit. These, it's shit hitting the fan is really shit hitting the fan, and no matter how much of a hoard or survival prep thing that you do, there's no way you're going to get by without some kind of skill set to deal with the problems that are going to arise if the shit hits the fan. That's my little prep spiel, since you tend to hone in on that minimalists can't survive. In fact, I think minimalists are at an advantage because they already know how to deal with not having a lot of these comforts, such as a lot of food storage or, running water or even electricity, because they've learned to live mobily away from these things and know how to take advantage of what's out there infrastructure-wise to survive. And that's the next step, is to survive without the infrastructure from there. And I think a minimalist is at an advantage there because they already know their basic needs and the things they need to do to survive without being tied to the grid, without being tied to all of the comforts that they necessarily that an average consumer is used to. All the creature comforts go away, and you get down to some of the basic survival things. And I think minimalists are more in tune with the basics for survival. Some are not. Some are just small time consumers that have just prioritized certain forms of consumption. And like I said, it depends on your value set, what kind of minimalist you end up being.
Need fresh food, obviously. And how they think this goes against consumerism is beyond me. In Japan, the people were sold this lifestyle along with really cute, super efficient, small micro apartments. But here in America, those of us who have access to real land, a micro apartment just isn't appealing. So they put...
I wouldn't mind a micro apartment. Unfortunately, our real estate prices are out of control, and they're not building micro apartments. If they were building micro apartments, we wouldn't have hundreds of thousands of homeless motherfuckers in a lot of cities, because the cost of living is too high for them to get a normal place. Did you think of that? Micro apartments would go a long way to reduce the amount of people living on tents in the streets in California and in other cities as well. It's a growing problem that people can't afford this American dream anymore, this house apartment shit, and they're having to learn to live this way, whether they like it or not. And I don't agree that you should be forced into minimalism because of your, circumstances. I think minimalism should be kind of a choice, and that makes it healthy, because if you're forced into minimalism, you're forced to live this way, you're going to be coveting the American dream still. You're going to be chasing something that is even harder to achieve now than our, grandparents had to go through. So, and they started fairly minimalist when they were young. This consumerism, this level of consumption that we're at now was not always the case. People lived very simple lives in the past. Yes, you had the elites who didn't, but there wasn't a lot of them. The average middle-class individual lived fairly minimally for a lot of their life until we started this drive to become more consumerist.
Was just a tiny house. The fascinating, wonderful, beautiful, completely impractical tiny house. So if you find yourself with minimal belongings, living in a small space, and nowhere to truly store a damn thing, don't be surprised if your lifestyle ends up costing more. Not having enough stuff on hand means not being prepared in an emergency.
And I've been living as a successful minimalist for a couple years now, and I can tell you my cost of living is way down. I've had to cut out a lot of comforts, sleeping on a pull-out love seat, stuff like that. Yeah, it would be nice to have a comfier bed, but that comfier bed is going to cost me more money because I need it, and then I need 2 rooms. I need a bedroom and then a living space. Right now, it's efficient. Like, my bedroom turns into the living room. It's all taken care of. Square footage costs more money, plain and simple. No matter where the fuck you live, square footage costs more money. And while, yes, some of these tiny houses are stupidly expensive, you could efficiently just buy a trailer for $2,000 and just build one legally and make a basic bitch shelter that you can hang your hat at, sleep in, has air conditioning, a composting toilet of some kind, or even an RV toilet system where you got to empty it periodically, which would be more expensive, I think. And, ration the amount of water you shower with. These are all things that are inconvenient, but don't cost more. Not to mention, if you throw some solar panels on there and you downsize your demand on electricity, that you reduce your dependency on the grid altogether at that point. The initial investment cost would eventually be paid back on savings over time, but it is not more expensive. You're not constantly, and even in this day and age, if you do keep all of your food in the grocery store and only go there every day to eat, it's become so efficient now that you could do so very cheaply. We've got electric vehicles, we've got bicycles that you can now just get with an app. They're littering all over the streets in a lot of places, but it's becoming a thing to where it's not hard to get from point A to point B, and you don't even need to own a vehicle to do it. And you could, if you structured it right, you could save a shit ton of money. But if you try and live this current American level of consumption while trying to live in a tiny house, you're going to run into problems. And some people do that, and they end up miserable in those tiny houses. They end up selling them at a loss.
Only keeping on hand that which you need for the day and maybe the day after that means that you don't
look at all that processed food there.
Have the 3 days to 2 weeks worth of food and water that FEMA recommends.
And who gives a shit what FEMA recommends? FEMA's, if you have to turn to FEMA, it's bad. It's bad. And it's much better to learn some skills to take care of yourself instead of just storing enough to keep yourself out of the FEMA camp. But 9 times out of 10, this storage of shit in your house is going to get wiped out during a natural disaster that's significant enough to require FEMA to intervene. We're not just talking about a blackout here. We're talking about a hurricane wiped out your town, or a tornado wiped your shit out, or a flood came through and flooded all of your precious storage. Then where the fuck are you? You're still going to the fucking FEMA to get your fucking water and shit. Survival is hard when our infrastructure breaks down, and keeping a ton of shit isn't necessarily the answer to that. Having the skills to acquire shit after the shit hits the fan, that is something that you should work on. Not necessarily keeping a year's worth of shit in a basement somewhere in case the apocalypse kicks off, so to speak.
Then, when a flood happens, a tornado comes by, or the second coming of Christ happens to occur, you're going to get a knock on the door from FEMA.
That's if you even have a fucking door for them to knock on.
They're going to ask you, sir, ma'am, do you have enough water and non-perishable food on hand for 2 weeks? And then you say no. After that, you get hauled off to a FEMA camp, for your own good. And, because minimalism. The notion that you should be a minimalist and live in a tiny house while being plant-based is also a fairy tale. How do you plan on growing any of the vegetables that you need? Where will you put all the equipment? The cups, the dirt, the seeds, the pots, the gloves, the watering containers, the hoses, the fencing, the tractor, the lighting, the pads, and the decor, and a whole bunch more. I mean, if you're going to be plant-based and you want a homestead, you really can't do minimalism. Unless, of course, you pay someone to prepare your
So you're still missing the point of minimalism. You know, if you need those things to survive, then you can't fucking get rid of them. All right? But you don't need to hoard at the same time either to survive. We're very resilient motherfuckers. A lot of us are fat enough to where we don't even need 2 weeks worth of food. Just need 2 weeks worth of water. Because we have enough fucking calories on board that we aren't going to die of starvation during the shit hits the fan situation. You know, a lot of people are carrying around probably months worth of calories. So there's that. These are all things to consider, you know, in terms of survivalism. She's just so honed in that you got to have all of this shit, and because you have all of this shit, you're not a minimalist. No, minimalism is not about how much shit you have. It's about the value of the shit you have, and are you wasting your resources and time? That's what minimalism is. It is not this black and white fucking issue that, you know, if you do this, you're minimalist, or if you don't do this, you're not minimalist. Or, you know, that's not something you can do to categorize a minimalist. All right?
every meal. And that's what it comes down to. Minimalism sees to it that you don't have the supplies on hand to bake the things that you need. You don't have the supplies on hand to produce the things that you need. And that means buying more, shopping more, and getting more things pre-made. If you say, for example...
So if you know, that's the other issue. It's not about not consuming at all. It's about the value of your consumption and how much wasted consumption we have in our lives, you know. How much plastic shit from Walmart are you buying? Well, you probably don't need all that plastic shit from Walmart. It's not bringing you any value. It's not bringing you any happiness. It's just taking up space in your house that could probably be used for other things that you do value, that do bring value to your life. And like I said, that's subjective. Whatever your value system is. You know, one person's minimalism is going to look different than another person's, and you can't judge everyone because you don't like someone else's version of minimalism. That it's not something you consider. Like you're some kind of like snob that your way is the way and everyone else's way is bullshit. You know, that's a vegan mindset. Yeah, you know, it's not a... We need to stop getting into this either you are or you aren't mindsets and understand that there's nuance, that there's gray area, that as long as you're making a concerted effort to improve yourself, to reduce your consumption, that you are doing the right thing. You know, it's not about being the perfect minimalist or qualifying to be called minimalist. If you are practicing these things by downsizing, getting rid of shit that brings no value to your life, weighing the opportunity costs of purchases and whether or not they will bring you fulfillment or are worth your time and life energy that you put into making the money to purchase those things, these are all just concepts that could be applied to a wide range of value systems. And, you know, there could be a minimalist that lives in a huge house because they value that huge house and having lots of space. Even if it's empty space, they like having the space. And they're willing to pay the massive electricity bill to keep that space comfortable. You know, at the same time, they might not be far along on their journey to have realized that they are wasting some time and resources. But that doesn't mean they aren't at least trying to apply these principles to improve not only their life, but to reduce their levels of consumption to something that's more reasonable. I'm not an advocate for us going to completely where you can't buy shit at all and we shouldn't even make the shit to sell it. No, that's an extreme level of philosophy, and it would result in the collapse of society and capitalism, because we are a consumer-based society. Our entire economy is based on continuous consumption and debt. And unfortunately, we've prioritized going into debt to continue to consume beyond our means of production, and that is not sustainable long term as a society. So you railing on somebody who's taken the time to downsize their life and live on the bare minimum because they're not, reducing their consumption enough to qualify for your version of minimalist is complete horseshit, especially if they've downsized or stepped down from the average motherfucker's level of consumption, and thereby reduced their footprint as being part of the problem of overconsumption, which plagues our entire society. It's destroying our environment. It's destroying our lives and lifestyle and happiness. It's all going down to shit. And, trying to talk shit about somebody that's trying to fix that about their life, it's not even that they're trying to necessarily convert everyone around them. These are people that are trying to just show and share their experience for the most part. Now, there's some that have commercialized it, and it has become a trending topic with which people are faking it. And, so there is that level of bullshit, and I agree you should come down harshly on people that do that and judge them appropriately since they're putting it out there. But I think it's still, that normal vegan logic that, whatever other people are doing, if it's not what you're doing, it's completely wrong. That's a mindset that I think Daphne has carried over from her days as a vegan. And you can see it in a lot of her videos, in my opinion. That's my thoughts on Daphne Reloaded.
Get a lot of manicures, like a lot of pedicures, and drink a lot of wine. Keeping this stuff on hand to give yourself manicures and pedicures would be helpful, along with the supplies you need to make that wine that you love so much. But if you use the KonMari method, and you live like you're in Japan, well, you should just throw all that stuff away and go out and get professional manicures, get professional pedicures, and buy all of your wine.
And I don't think, her method is the way most minimalists are going about it. I don't think that this is the method. And I don't think it's the way. Some of us downsize more than others because we don't value a lot of things. But it doesn't mean you can't apply the principles to your own value system. And constantly evaluate your value system to make sure that you're not wasting your life and resources consuming things that don't bring value to your life.
Pre-made
doesn't mean you should devalue everything and get rid of it all and just live in a room. That's kind of an extremist view of minimalism that I don't support. And that doesn't mean some people might find that more fulfilling and free their resources up to do a lot more, or reduce their need to constantly work for corporations in the corporate world, just because they value their time more than they value their stuff. And make no mistake, the less stuff you have, the lower your cost of living. Completely lower cost of living. And the less stuff you purchase in your travels, the more you can spread your travel budget out to where you can do more and experience more. Some people value that over having a house full of shit. You can question the morality of people's value systems here and there, but if they're trying to focus on what they value and get rid of the waste and overconsumption, I say that's probably a good thing, and we shouldn't be talking, down on somebody who goes to an extreme level of minimalism.
Bottles made by manufacturers. Idiocracy is the true plan behind minimalism. The theory of minimalism only long-term appeals to those who are truly lazy. too lazy to produce and too lazy to care if they keep enough stuff on hand to produce.
Okay, as a minimalist, I work pretty fucking hard. I produce a lot of content. Um, and even when I'm not producing content, I do a pretty good amount of work to pay for the things that I do need to do as far as survival goes, as far as, you know, this, is it lazy to not want to work 70 hours a week for the corporate world and have little to show for it in return because you've given them all your time? Is that laziness? I think once again you're painting with a broad brush and you don't even know what the fuck you're talking about. I don't even know that you were ever minimalist. I know you homesteaded as a vegan, but that doesn't make you a minimalist because that doesn't necessarily mean you're practicing, the tenets of minimalism then. Yeah, you might have less shit because you have a smaller living space, but that doesn't mean you're a minimalist. Minimalist is a mindset. It's not measured in terms of how much stuff you have or whatever, that you seem to be categorizing minimalism as. It's a mindset. It's a value system. You no longer value things as much as the average motherfucker. And you do things that streamline and make your life a lot more efficient so that you reclaim our most valuable resource, which is time. And you can still be a productive member of society as a minimalist. You can still even work a corporate job as a minimalist. And you'd have way more resources. Your dollar would go a hell of a lot further than the guy in the cubicle next to you. Because you, at the end of the day, aren't wasting those resources that you're spending all of your time and life energy producing. You're going out and doing things with that money. And you're still supporting the economy. If your travel's your thing and you're a minimalist, you're spending money on tourist shit. You're buying your way into these national parks that people take care of. You are participating when you go to the supermarket that you've come out on. You are obviously supporting that industry by going in and buying your food there and on an as needed basis. Yeah, you're not supporting our system as much as a unbridled, in debt up to his eyeballs fucking consumerist would, but that's what leads to our problems that we have in society today. And I don't think unchecked consumerism is quite the answer. Minimalism is becoming more popular because our current value system and consumerist way of life in debt-driven economy is not sustainable, and it's starting to show with the amount of people falling into homelessness, falling into poverty. And I think if everyone learned some of the concepts of minimalism, they would be able to more efficiently utilize their resources. And that's really what it comes down to. Reclaiming time and putting it to use doing something that you value. That's what it is. It's reducing the amount of time that you spend miserable doing something you do not value. And different people value different things. There might be some minimalist out there that likes working on cars. That's a huge service that a lot of people need, fixing cars and shit. There might be somebody who values the service industry, likes working with people, likes interacting with people. That doesn't make it wrong. Everyone has different things that they find fulfilling in participating in society. Now, living in a cabin in the woods, probably not participating in society much. Becoming self-sufficient, probably not participating in society, but you're also not draining society doing that. If you manage to go out and homestead and survive as a minimalist with virtually no ties to the grid whatsoever. That's a pretty good skill set. It's a pretty lonely way to live, but at the same time, you're not draining resources from society. Therefore, you're not really needing to pitch in. Whereas if you're like living in a vehicle, you're definitely consuming infrastructure resources, and you should be participating in the economy and your level of consumption, and you're not consuming a lot. As much as you like to say, for example, just on this road trip, I drove over 1,000 miles on this road trip and spent $42 in gas because I drive a very fuel efficient vehicle. And that's it's called reducing your consumption levels wherever you can. And it's nothing but a benefit to society. So I don't quite understand you're so angry about minimalism. What did minimalism ever do to you? Is it because you are jealous of what people are doing because they portray themselves as so happy? When I could tell you, they're not going to tell you the downside of it. You're not going to have a minimalist channel come out and be like, "Hey, this is what sucks." I mean, I've made videos and shit that sucks about minimalism. And I verbalize my mistakes, and I think a lot of channels don't do that. That talk about minimalism. It's a lifestyle. It's a journey. It's not something that you achieve. It's a constant thought process that goes into living your life.
If you don't have the stuff on hand to produce, you instantly become a consumer. Some young men recently started this online minimalism movement, sharing how they travel the world with just a laptop. Yeah, I'll tell you how. They order every meal in, they order every milkshake, they order every smoothie, and they use only hotel toilet paper. And they don't have enough water on.
And all of these resources are out there, regardless of they're doing that or not. Public bath. Are you suggesting we shouldn't have public bathrooms anymore? Are you suggesting Starbucks shouldn't allow people to hang out and drink coffee all fucking day? I go in to Starbucks when I'm on the road and living out of the vehicle. It's no problem. It's a nice air-conditioned location that's not in my car, where I can plug my laptop in and utilize their electricity in exchange for me paying $3 for a cup of coffee. Seems like a good deal to me. Not to mention the 50-cent refills that they allow. Why would they do that if they weren't, they could just charge $3 per cup of coffee if I was draining too much of their economy. But that they've set their business up to allow for us to do that. They don't ask us to leave. I've spent 6 hours in a Starbucks once editing video, doing my work. Businesses, you're supporting them by going in there. You're spending money. It's not like you're going in there and not, I've never gone into a Starbucks to do my video work or hang out on my laptop without buying shit tons of coffee in the process. And since you think about vegans, they're carb burners. They're in there buying their little vegan snacks and foods and lattes and smoothies and iced coffee, whatever the fuck it is. It's like paying your rent for the day, and it's arguably a lot cheaper than paying your rent for the day or your mortgage for a day. So I don't understand what you're saying. Yeah, it's consumerist behavior, but it's a more efficient form of consumerism. It's all minimalism really is. You still consume. We consume resources to live. You can't live without consuming fucking resources. Even if you homestead, you're still going to consume resources. Unless you live completely as a survivalist in nature and learn all the skills necessary for bushcraft, hunting and gathering. And even then, you are consuming resources. You're consuming them from nature at that point. You cannot survive as a human being without consuming. The point of minimalism is to rein it in, to not overconsume, to not waste resources, time, to not destroy the environment with waste products from our lack of self-control when it comes to consumption. This polarized view of minimalism just doesn't cut it. It's not accurate. And I even wrote her a comment on there. I was like, just stick to slamming veganism. I think you're doing a better job there than slamming minimalism.
On hand.
And I've watched people that make fun of other minimalists. There's a few van lifers I watch that are just, they parody all the trendy minimalists that you see out there, the ones that YouTube wants to prop up and give millions of subscribers to, who aren't really even minimalists, they're just pretending.
To keep FEMA at bay when they come knocking. You can say this kind of minimalism suits you. You can say that it's simpler. You can even convince me that it causes you less stress. But stop telling people and stop deluding yourself into thinking that it causes less consumerism, that it costs less money than a life of production, farming, baking, growing, hunting, cooking, crafting, making.
All of which are consuming resources, by the way. Name me one person that is completely free of consuming natural resources. You know, the difference between you being out in nature and consuming resources, and, you know, you can hunt a land to not have enough food on it. That's why we were nomadic when we were hunter-gatherers. When you are living somewhere, you're consuming resources. You're consuming wood for fire. You're consuming all of the plants that are edible in the planet. You know, yeah, you can renew some of these resources, but in the end, you are still consuming resources to live. And unless you're advocating everybody go out and be hunter-gatherers again, in which case we would still have problems to where species would be hunted to extinction, soil would become eroded from not properly taking care of it. And I do think we need more sustainable organic farming practices in that situation, but when you're human, you consume to survive. But we do not need the level of consumption where you have a huge house, you go in debt up to your eyeballs, work 70 hours a week, and barely scrape by on your bills, and then end up out on the street in the end anyway, with nothing. Or end up in a fucking old folks home on 10 different prescription drugs as a result of this overconsumption that we currently force on the entire population here in the United States. Let's have a little more nuance to our criticisms here. Yes, you are still consuming as a minimalist, and I do not disagree with that. I consume still as well, and I have no problem with it. I don't lose any sleep at night. Why? Because I'm happier than I was, I'm consuming less than I was, and I'm living on a lot less money than I did before. When I was making $60,000 a year, I spent every fucking dime of it. I make less than a minimum wage annual income now, and I don't spend every dime of it. I hold on to as much of it as I can for as long as I can, and try and use it as efficiently as possible by only investing in things that I can use to survive and produce income with. You know, that's my form of survival as a minimalist. There's no way to live a consumption-free minimal life, and any minimalist that's telling you that that's possible is delusional at best.
Making and making. What would your great-grandmother say to you if she knew you thought it was easier to just live without a sewing machine because Walmart sells quilts? Simplify your life in all of the ways that you want, but do yourself a solid favor and please stay prepared. Here is a checklist that is not KonMari approved, but could save your life. Number 1. Keep enough water on hand for 3 days to 2 weeks. The more, the
Or get you a good water filter that'll last you a hell of a lot longer than 3 weeks for, you know, maybe I think it's $15 for a Sawyer Mini. And then go out and learn how to use it. Learn what water sources you can, you know, use. Create sustainable... There's plenty of survival channels to learn these skills, by the way. You know, I even saw a survival prepper show you how you can use a, you know, dehumidifier, which you could plug into a solar system, which is expensive to buy, but could save your ass for a while when the grid goes down. You know, I think she doesn't know enough about the prep community to really give advice on how to be prepared. You know, this I have to have a big survival stash is something I often disagree with preppers on, because it's still not enough. You need the skill set to acquire resources, and you need to be mobile enough that when one area is devoid of resources, you can go to an area that does have resources. This is how you survive in a disaster. If the resources are gone from where you at, you need to leave and go find resources. And you see people that are like starving to death and miserable in their environment that was wiped out by a natural disaster, and then 100 miles away, is business as usual. Plenty of running water, plenty of resources, but yet they stay down in the FEMA camps or whatever, and they just hover around where the disaster hit, oftentimes dying in that situation because they're trying to cling to that area that is devoid currently of resources. We lived nomadically when we were hunter-gatherers, and that doesn't change in modern technology situations that require survival. Go out. If you don't have any resources where you're at, you need the skill set to keep the water coming in. That's most important. You can't go more than 3 days without water. You can go a long time without food, but 3 days without water, you're fucked. Make sure you have clothing that's adequate for the environment that you're in. Shelter. Have some form of emergency temporary shelter. There's plenty of that. You can have a bivy bag or some shit. You can bring a tarp. You can create your own shelter temporarily. These are all survival skills that many people are lacking, and depending on a hoard of resources that you keep in your house is the only means of survival is a bad move as far as preparedness goes. And if anything, minimalism could allow you the ability to prepare a hell of a lot better, because you have to learn some skills to live a lot more minimally and forego some of the creature comforts that our modern lifestyles afford us.
The better. Make sure it's fresh. Number 2, keep all the supplies you need to have on hand to make things. And when decluttering your life, try not to be so ruthless with the items that are useful tools and supplies. Number 3.
And that's true. I haven't gotten rid of anything that would make a dent in my ability to create content, because I am a content creator and photographer. I have all the items necessary to do that, and I don't advocate ever getting rid of those. They bring value. Not only do they bring value, but I actually extract more value from them than I initially spent purchasing them. As in, these items actually generate a profit over time from their original cost. So investing in a resource that has a return on your investment, even my vehicle is going to give me a return on investment, because I can go out and earn money with that vehicle at a faster rate than it's depreciating in maintenance levels. I've made consistent profit on my last 2 vehicles. My current vehicle will almost definitely yield a profit for me long term, which means I'm not, not only am I, not consuming more than I'm producing, because I'm providing a service. For example, the car. I paid $15,000 for it. I've made about $5,000 of that back in rideshare already. At the same time, I'm providing value to a person who doesn't necessarily have to purchase a vehicle now, because they can get from point A to point B, and they're paying me to take them. And in turn, that covers my vehicle. I don't have to worry about gas. I run rideshare, the tank gets filled. I don't have to worry about spending any resources, because the money I spent on that vehicle will be returned. And the vehicle before it was, I think, $1,700, $1,500, something like that. And I made a profit on that vehicle, and that was a shittier vehicle with shittier gas mileage. That's an example of something, that I do feel some minimalists. I can agree that there are some minimalists that don't get that concept, that, it's not about so much your level of consumption. It's how much resources you're wasting. And we can agree and disagree on some of this, but I disagree in hoarding for a disaster. It's just there's so many things that can go wrong with that cause that to be a waste of time, energy, and resources for storing all of that shit. And I do believe you consume a lot less resources by allowing the infrastructure that our taxes have paid for to be available to be used and utilized more efficiently, although with a lot less comfort. It's a slippery slope, I guess, between under-consuming and over-consuming. But I think the majority of people are in the over-consuming category, so a little minimalism won't hurt anybody.
Great. Have a fireplace, a genuine, honest fireplace, wood-burning stove, or pellet stove. If for nothing else, you need
I agree. You should have the ability to have your needs met. Shelter, food, water, clothing. Those are the basic needs. Know how to do that. How would you address these things if your entire house was wiped out? Like you went to work one day, you came home, and your entire block was leveled. What would you do? I think a minimalist, particularly a van lifer, is going to have a distinct advantage in that situation. If you're used to living in your vehicle, unless your vehicle gets wiped out, which can happen, but if you're mobile, you can avoid disaster. You can escape the area. Now, granted, you're going to run out of fuel. There's other issues with that. But I think you're still at an advantage for somebody who set up this fucking storage bunker full of shit to survive. But, making fire is not a hard thing to do if you got wood and you got some way of igniting it. And you'd be able to make fire in most situations, with the flood being the exception. It's not going to be easy, but it's a skill you should practice, because that's how you can keep warm. Making sure that your bedding is utilizable in that situation, that can help with a lot. But in the end, if you have a backpack with everything you need in it that weighs roughly 60 pounds in terms of it has a tent, it has, a 10-degree sleeping bag, it has capability of sheltering you through a variety of weather situations, and you have the capability of filtering water, and you have a few skills in terms of gathering, hunting, or scavenging food, then you likely will be ahead of the game if the shit hits the fan.
For backup. If the power goes out in the middle of the winter, you need more than an electric heater. Number 4. Screw KonMari and keep as much food on hand as you can possibly store and keep fresh. This message brought to you by your Flat Earth nurse, Daphne Reloaded. I'd like to preface part 2 by explaining that I did indeed give tiny houses a fair shot. People seem to think that if I just saw one in real life, I would understand, or if I just tried one out once, I would know. But the truth is...
To me, a tiny house is a wealthy version of minimalism. Would I ever live in a tiny house? Absolutely, I would. If I could afford it. It would be of enough value of me to own a house that could potentially be moved if I needed a different piece of land, or if I couldn't afford that piece of land. But the only way I would ever buy one is if I had enough spare resources to buy one, and I would also evaluate whether or not I wanted to pay the opportunity cost. If I spent $80,000 on a tiny house, I have seen them for a lot less. I've seen one for $15,000. $15,000 for a tiny house. So then you throw in the cost of buying a piece of land to put it on, or renting a space in someone's driveway, and then paying part of their electric bill for attaching it to the grid because you didn't have solar panels on it. It really depends. I likely probably wouldn't buy the tiny house. To be honest with you, I'd more likely to travel and live mobile on the road, uh, just to have the better life experiences. Because if you have the tiny house holding you down, it's a lot harder to do those things.
Is that I have. I've traveled far to visit the tiny house factory, listened to their sales pitch, drank their free lemonade, and heard what they had to say about being mobile, independent, and mortgage free. And by the end of the tour, you begin to wonder why you're even there. You start to get the feeling that the tiny house isn't even all that mobile. They recommend that you don't move it very often because it will fall the fuck apart. By the end of the tour, you start getting the idea that maybe the tiny house isn't as truly independent as they say it is. It needs a lot of outside assistance to work. By the end of the tour, you start to wonder, why in the
And that's not entirely true. We have, between solar panel and battery power and more efficient electronics, propane is not that expensive in terms of being able to cook. Not to mention you could go the wood burner stove route. Yeah, if you try and pimp your tiny house out with all of these amenities, it's going to be more expensive. But you don't have to do that. You can literally build your own from shit that you find. It's not that cut and dry. No, you're not going to. You're still going to have to buy some materials to build one, which means some trips to Home Depot and consuming that shit. But for the most part, there's people out there that have built out of like freight storage containers that they bought that were being sold off by trucking companies. You know, there's trucking trailers that were converted into tiny houses. That'd be a pretty big tiny house, to be honest with you. The only regulation about tiny houses is it has to be on wheels, or you are governed by local regulations and building codes. I would like to see those building codes fuck off so that we could just build a tiny house without having to skirt around, these regulations that are mainly designed to keep us from doing that. They're not really something that's a safety issue. It's all about the value of real estate and tax revenue and all of these things that the bureaucracy has made it impossible to build a tiny house-sized house. And I'm willing to bet that sooner or later they're going to get around to regulating what you can do on a trailer. So there's that. But one thing I do know they can't really control is our ability to live out of a vehicle, which is something I like having that option. I like to know that I can fuck off anywhere in this country and live out of my vehicle for very long periods of time. That is something I hope they don't regulate. And unfortunately, there are many communities and cities and places that do everything in their power to stop you from staying and sleeping in your vehicle. Because you're not technically paying land taxes. Even if you rent a place, you're paying taxes on that place for the property owner, or if you own property, you're going to be paying taxes on that. But if you're in a tiny house on a piece of land that you own, other than the property tax for that land, you're not really paying for a lot of the resources unless you have those piped in. But if you're homesteading in a tiny house, you're not contributing as much to the infrastructure. So, but at the same time, you're also not draining the infrastructure if you're doing those types of things. So there's that. It's a trade-off. One could philosophize either way on whether or not you are a valuable member of society if you are a minimalist living in a tiny house.
hell they're telling you it's mortgage free when the three models parked outside are over $100,000 each?
And that's insane. $100,000 for a tiny house, fuck off with that. And I agree with you there. I think, corporations are trying to jump onto this movement of minimalism and still make a profit, and they're getting out ahead of the game. That's something to be aware of. There are things that you will be sold as a minimalist that supposedly make it more efficient for your life, but at the same time, they're taking a big upfront cost for those things. How long does a tiny house last before you need to fix it? Probably just as long as a house would last if you had to maintain it. And so there is a cost to maintain a tiny house. Eventually the roof's going to leak. You might not have insulated it just right. You could have other problems, condensation issues, venting issues, temperature control issues, electricity issues, plumbing issues. It's subjected to all the issues that you would have in owning a home. So, but I think I'm going to wrap up this video. You can check out that is Minimalism Dangerous on Daphne Reloaded channel if you want to finish out that video. But I guess I want to close in saying that do not paint minimalism with a broad brush. It is merely a series of concepts to make your life more efficient, to reduce your levels of overconsumption and wasting your most valuable resource. The most valuable resource you have is time. And if you have to go and work 80 hours a week to pay your debts for all the shit you bought that is sitting in your fucking house that you're never in because you're working all the time and you go there to sleep if you're lucky, then you're probably could use some of these tenets of minimalism to free up some of your time and reduce your cost of living significantly. And in this day and age where everyone's fucking broke as shit, doesn't have a savings or a retirement, learning to reduce our levels of consumption to more manageable means is something I think everybody could fucking benefit from. But what the fuck do I know? Because I'm not a fucking expert. I'm just a fucking asshole. Please like and subscribe for more shit, and I'll make more shit. Also, head to ScottTheTruckDriver.com, and if you found this video entertaining or enlightening in any way and would like me to make more videos, you can leave a tip in the virtual tip jar, and for every $20, I put out a video up to 5 a week for each week of contributions. Anything over that is a tip to, help me survive. But if you don't want to do that, you can always go to ScottTheTruckDriver.com and for free sign up to the email list and stay informed on all the content I produce. Podcasts, live streams, videos, exclusives, audio versions of shit. There's all kinds of shit that you can get in the subscriber lounge, and you get the password of that by being on the email list. Password changes periodically. So that's that. Also, if you want to participate in my live streams, head to DLive and follow me on DLive as Scott the Truck Driver on there. You can find links through my website along with a calendar for when I do schedule live streams. But if you're following me on DLive and you have the DLive app, you will get notifications whenever I go live and be able to participate. And some of those streams are quite long, 4 or 5 hours long in some cases, and they don't make it to YouTube, so you're missing out on content if you're not participating there, or if you're not subscribed, because I do post replays once they fall off of DLive. They go into the subscriber lounge for you to download and listen to or watch at your convenience. So that's it for today. Quit talking shit, Daphne, about minimalism, because you're really kind of applying vegan logic to minimalism, and vegan logic doesn't work when you apply it to anything, to be honest with you. It has to be this way or that way, without any nuance or consideration of different people having different values. It's just kind of, I don't know. It's not the best way to approach life. There are gray areas, and there are ways that some people are successful that other people don't like, but that doesn't change the fact that that person is successful, happy, and living a fulfilling life. Their path has been different than yours. Lumping everyone into small categories like that is a recipe for disaster, I think. In my opinion. Have a nice motherfucking day. Shit. Yeah, I did all of that without consuming a fucking thing except some electricity. Yeah. Uh-oh. Because I consumed electricity, I'm not minimalist. I have to learn how to solar power my balls going forward.